Good afternoon. I would like to begin this with a question for you all. So by a quick show of hands, how many of you have ever watched on your television or attended a major sporting event? Something like the World Cup, the Olympics. See, my sister's back. She's been to the Olympics. Now, I want you to keep that hand raised if you've ever felt some sort of connection to the energy and the excitement of it all. Okay, thank you. You can put your hands down now. There's something powerful about events like these because they bring people together in ways that very few things can. Imagine this for a second. The game is tied, thousands of fans are on their feet, and the game-winning shot is made. The stadium erupts instantly with flags waving, music blaring, and millions of people from around the world celebrating together. The atmosphere is almost exhilarating. But while we are watching this exposition unfold, there's something happening behind the scenes that many of us tend to overlook, and that is the environmental impact. My name is Alayna Bailey, and I present to you Chasing Gold, Losing Green, the carbon costs of mega events. So that experience I just described to you is what we call a mega event. These are massive, large-scale gatherings that attract audiences from all around the globe, and they also leave long-lasting impacts on the host cities. This is because they bring things like tourism, economic activity, global attention, even an international sense of unity. And they also somehow convince people that spending $20 on stadium nachos is a good financial decision. Don't worry, I'm guilty of it too. But along with all these benefits come serious environmental consequences, and much of that can be sourced back to one thing, and that is carbon emissions. So when in balance, carbon is actually crucial for our survival. It's all around the room right now. But when in excess amounts, it becomes a greenhouse gas, and that is a major contributor to global warming. So carbon emissions can come from many things, but when we're talking about mega events, the biggest contributor is travel, primarily aviation. These massive gatherings depend on international travel. So whether that's transporting fans, athletes, coaches, even media crews, there are millions of people traveling around the world. And unfortunately, airlines don't exactly run on positive vibes and team spirit. Aviation is actually extremely carbon intensive, with even a singular long-haul flight producing tons, literal tons of carbon dioxide per passenger. Now we need to be thinking this on the scale of millions. And that doesn't even, And that doesn't even account for the emissions produced by cars, which is also quite substantial. The upcoming 2026 World Cup is a great example of this, because it is projected to be the most polluting tournament in history. This is because it is expanding to 48 teams, and instead of reducing to a single host city, it will now span across the entire continent of North America. This means that fans won't just be traveling once. They'll be constantly moving from city to city, country to country. The environmental impact of this travel is absurd, but it becomes even more shocking when we think about it per person. Let's take an England fan into account. If a single England fan attended all matches for their team leading up to the final, they would travel around 15,000 miles, and that would account for 3.5 tons of carbon dioxide. Now, these numbers might not seem that significant to you, but that is comparable to heating a home for 19 months. That is over a year and a half. And keep in mind, this is only one fan. We need to be thinking this on the scale of millions. This is why encouraging things like public transportation or even carpooling is so important, but this is only possible if we are able to reduce the size of these massive events. And travel really isn't the only issue we're talking about here. Mega events also require huge construction projects. In preparation, host cities build things like roads, stadiums, rail systems, airports, even entire Olympic villages. And the issue lies in how these projects are so carbon intensive. See, the materials they use, like steel or cement, release massive amounts of greenhouse gas in their production, which is a major contributor to global warming. And sometimes, these buildings barely even get used once the event is over. And this is what we call a white elephant. Infrastructure that is built for an event, but later goes abandoned or underused. Turns out building a $1 billion stadium for 2 weeks of use isn't exactly the best long-term plan. But this might not seem like a big deal to you. It's just something that kids can run around in, or you can just drive by on your way to work. But while these stadiums sit empty, the emissions from creating them had already happened. Forests were cleared, materials were utilized, and ecosystems were permanently altered. So this means that once it is done, we cannot go back. Mega events infrastructure inflicts permanent damage to the environment, and that becomes especially detrimental when the infrastructure is not even benefiting the community. But whether buildings are underused or not, mega events still consume a substantial amount of resources. They have to operate almost nonstop, which means that resources like energy and water also need to be utilized nonstop. Things like stadium lighting, broadcasting systems, even security, they all require energy, and much of that energy still comes from fossil fuels. As you can see here, the years of hosting the Olympic Games, as modeled by this red area at the top, shows a sharp incline in energy usage in comparison to a normal year. So the takeaway, hosting a mega event means more energy usage, and more energy usage means more carbon emissions. We can also bring up water as a major resource, especially in terms of things like field maintenance or artificial snow production. And that last one becomes especially prominent in the Winter Olympics. So because of climate change, many Winter Olympics locations no longer receive reliable snowfall. This means that they must now depend on artificial snow. But the problem is, producing that uses huge amounts of water and electricity. I spoke with a representative at Berkshire East Mountain Resort, which many of you probably heard of or even been to, and he said that with these warmer temperatures, a lot of times their machines seem to be running non-stop. So in other words, climate change is creating an endless cycle. Warmer temperatures means more artificial snow production, and more artificial snow uses more energy and water, directly increasing carbon emissions. But despite many of these environmental impacts related to resource consumption or the ones we talked about before, like travel or infrastructure, many events still try to market them as sustainable. And this introduces the idea of greenwashing, the practice of organizations exaggerating their environmental efforts in order to appear sustainable. But this is without making any meaningful change. A lot of times, organizations will promote things like recycling programs, electric cars, even carbon offsets, which are basically just a certificate that they can receive to reduce emissions in other areas, like maybe donating to a cause. But that doesn't address their own source. Let's take the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. Qatar claimed that their event is going to be carbon neutral. This means that the amount of carbon that they put into the environment would equal the amount that they were able to remove. This drew much attention, but later, watchdogs uncovered that this was massively underestimated. The Paris Olympics branded themselves as the most sustainable Olympics ever. And while this might be true, the event still produced 1.58 million tons of carbon dioxide. So just because something is less harmful does not automatically make it sustainable. So the question becomes, what can actually change? Now, this is not me saying that mega events need to disappear completely. I really don't think the internet can handle that, or me for that matter, because I'm also a big sports fan. But no, mega events truly do bring such a great sense of cultural connection and international unity. But real sustainability requires structural change, change from the source. First of all, mega events need to become smaller in size, because fewer host cities means less travel, and less travel means less carbon emissions. Second, events need to stop striving for bigger and bigger crowds every year, because streaming services already allow for that global participation aspect of mega events. Infrastructure also needs to become a lot smarter, because instead of investing in a billion-dollar stadium that sometimes goes underused afterwards, we could be using existing stadiums or even creating modular housing, which is basically something that can later be relocated and repurposed. And finally, sustainability claims need real accountability, because just calling something green does not automatically make it green. So we know that mega events bring people together. They create moments that people remember for the rest of their lives. But with this comes a growing environmental cost that we need to be thinking about. So the issue isn't whether these events should exist, it's whether they can evolve. Because if mega events truly represent the future of global unity, they must also represent the future of global responsibility. Thank you.